Welcome to the Tax Break Breakdown with your hosts Greg and Doug. Sit back and relax while they review current and upcoming childcare tax credit programs employers can take advantage of. Now, on to the show.
Are we good?
Are we good?
We're good to go.
You just want laughter for the intro. That's what it is. You want laughter like you want me sounding like a horse again as this comes in.
Yes. So, welcome to episode 2 of the Tax Break Breakdown with your hosts, Greg and Doug. If you don't know Doug, we have over 400 subscribers to our newsletter on LinkedIn.
That's like 399 more than I expected.
Yeah, minus us two. So that's actually 398 more people.
No, I never subscribed. That was just you.
No, over 400. That was as of earlier today, which is exciting.
That is exciting.
And everything that we do on the newsletter, there's a series that's going on now, which is looking at each state. So I think we've done everything up to California. So Delaware's next, and so forth. We just did Indiana last week.
Yeah,
that was a good one. I think we got a lot of good feedback from that one.
Yeah, we got some hours. It was great. Loved it.
Everybody's been pretty positive about it.
Deadline's tomorrow.
Oh yeah, Indiana deadline's tomorrow. So if you didn't know, go check it out.
By the time you listen to this, it will be passed.
No, I'm gonna try to get this out tonight.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the biggest thing is the exporting. You know. Yeah. But downloads, I think our podcast 1 week's like 30.
That's also 29 more than I expected.
Yeah, I told my wife I'm a content creator now. We told everybody. Doug and I are very, very similar, and you're gonna find out over episodes. But I don't think we said a first fact. But the first one, did we do a fact? I don't remember.
No, we didn't do a fact, but this is the weekly Grug fact. Right?
Yeah, Grug is our names combined, and that's what they call us.
I don't know if anybody would have put that together, man.
I don't think so. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But we're gonna start out with like the coolest one. Doug and I have the same birthday, same year, same month, same day, and we found this out at a company retreat in Palm Springs when we were wearing
matching Hawaiian shirts.
Yes, in the middle of the street. And we just gave each other a hug and said, what are the odds?
It was a special
That was a great moment.
It was a tender moment. It was a special moment.
It definitely was. So that's the Grug fact of the day. We need to have like an intro, like Grug fact. I'll try to put
when the budget increases, we can get the sound effects in.
Yeah, that's right. We're gonna try to do something new too. We're gonna have latest news, some discussion topics, and then we're going to have our main topic. The main topic is around solving childcare in rural areas for manufacturers. Like, this is probably one of the hardest populations to solve childcare for. Wouldn't you agree, Doug?
Yeah, it's really difficult. It's complicated. There's a lot of complexity to it, and it also makes it a really interesting challenge to go through. So excited to just kind of give an overview, but dive into a lot of the details and the numbers around it, because it's staggering when you go through it the first time.
Yes. And we have, if you're an HR team or looking to do something like this, we have questions you should ask yourself. And then we have ways just to think about it. So if you're going to try to solve this, there are certain things you should try to solve first before others. And we'll talk about those. Yep. First, latest news. I'm not sure if you saw this one, but Bay Systems got CHIPS funding from the CHIPS Act.
CHIPS funding? CHIPS funding got through. That's
CHIPS
exciting.
Funding got through, yes. For those that are not familiar with the CHIPS Act, this was from the administration. I believe they put in $52 billion to boost development of semiconductors in the U.S. It was August 22, I think, when they started it. Really, at the end of the day, when you pull it back, it's supposed to be around national security. So everything with chips, in national security, which is why they basically have hinted why they gave the money to BAE Systems first. It's for a new plant in New Hampshire, and it's focused on like military applications, so chips in fighter planes and so forth. The
Hmm.
reason why we're bringing it up is because part of the CHIPS Act included a provision, and what did it say, Doug? The exact term. What was the exact sentence?
The exact sentence from the CHIPS Act. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull that up, but I bet you have it.
No, I don't have it. But talk a little bit about how childcare is related to the CHIPS Act. Like, how did childcare get in there? What does it even
Right. I
talk
mean,
about?
Chaka got in there because you need people to work in chip manufacturing facilities, and to get people to show up to work, they need to have childcare. We look at, the ability for for an organization to retain, attract employees, right, consistently. This is a huge hurdle, and especially when you look at some of the areas, right, where these manufacturing facilities, tend to be. A lot of times they're in childcare deserts, and so when we build infrastructure as a country, in a locality, we want to make sure that the community is going to be stable. And part of that, a key part of that, is childcare. And so
Yep.
it was a great inclusion on that part. And I think really, will help the success of these facilities. And it was really geared towards creating new facilities or expanding existing facilities,
Yep.
right? And to do that, more workers coming into an area, and they have kids that are going to need somewhere to go, right, during the day.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is that it's a requirement, and there's different levels of it. So at first, like you could submit an application and just have the intent to do it, and then the second round
Hmm.
was like you need to have a plan. The other fascinating thing is that the childcare is not just for the chip manufacturer; it's for the construction workers too.
Hmm.
So it's for
Yeah.
anybody that's involved in building the plant. They have to provide some level of childcare. Um, and we even spoke with one of the designers of the CHIPS Act, and it was not uh, it was not just supposed to be, hey, construction workers and employees, like here's a website, go find the childcare yourself. Like the intent is that it actually has an impact on the community, and
Hmm.
that's why what we've seen is companies leveraging the home daycare networks because they're small businesses, and so for the employer though that's going to take these funding, you're going to need a system in place. You're going to need some type of program in place that can actually track community impact too, not just your employee impact. That's a big difference, and they called that out when we spoke to them.
Yeah, and I think, when we go through this, it's great news that the funding got pushed through. I know we've been kind of keeping an eye on it for a while now, like looking for this to happen and excited for this to happen, noting that it's coming. Um, But as we go into it, I mean, it really is like part and parcel to what we're going to talk about tonight is what are the challenges, right, in manufacturing and childcare, and especially in rural areas. Or it doesn't even necessarily need to be a rural area. It could just be an area where there's not a lot of childcare coverage, or there's an expansion, like a need to expand the population. How do you get the community ready to support that? So, uh, great bit of news, very timely as far as what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Second discussion topic here. I'm sure you are familiar with waitlist fees. This was an article
Uh,
that was put out by Moms First, who they had an opinion on it, um,
mm.
and it was a from Fast Company too. They put out a like a POV of their thoughts and opinions on um, having waitlist fees. They even said one of the things was in Canada, they actually
Mhm.
banned childcare programs that receive public money from collecting waitlist fees. What what are your thoughts on waitlist fees?
It's a tough thing, right? We look at, availability is such a big issue, especially when we look at infant spaces. And I know, I actually go back to, I remember my sister looking for daycare for my youngest nephew in the Seattle area. And like, I think she was on like five different wait lists, right? And I had them ranked, and I think 3 or 4 of them had fees. And I see I see the argument on both sides of it, right? I think there's an administrative cost that comes to managing a wait list. And it's where does that cost get shifted, right? Is that the cost of doing business for a facility, or does that shift to the parent? And it also can deter, right? If you have a waitlist fee, it can deter people from being on too many waitlists. My general take on it is like, the argument for them, right? Like dissuading people from being on a bunch of wait lists. Um, you know, Typically from what I've seen, those fees aren't super high, right? And so it
Like
becomes a
25
question
bucks,
of,
I think.
yeah, right?
Sometimes maybe 50. 10 to
I mean,
50.
I've seen them be a couple hundred to hold a space. But at the same time, right, when we talk about impacting childcare, right, and especially like the populations we like to talk about, right, and we really like to focus on frontline workers, right, those that don't have a ton of disposable income, right, it actually becomes it's a regressive thing because somebody who is making more money, right, has more stability, can afford to be on a bunch of wait lists, right? Like that dollar is not the same, two different segments of the population earning
Yeah.
differently. So to me, I think it's net negative. I understand where it comes from. I understand it from the provider side. But I wish there's a way, if it's administrative cost, like, there's technology out there that can help with those things. Like it doesn't have to be a huge administrative burden.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm always going to come back to like, is it actually helping or hurting, right? Like those that need it the most, right? And to me, when you do that, it's going to end up regressive. So not a fan myself, but I do understand why it exists.
Yeah. Um, the Indiana Act, remember last week, some
Hmm.
of the funding could actually go towards paying for waitlist fees. That was interesting. Remember part of
It
that?
could go to priority waitlist fees. You could
Yeah,
get to the front of
even
the
better.
line. I,
Which,
Better.
yeah,
I mean, I think there's. Listen, and we're going to go through this in depth, but the way to address this, like, to me, does it help? Can it help an organization to have something like that? Yes. But when we look at solving the overall problem, right, we're really just, taking away from somebody else and giving that space here, right? So
yep,
at some point, right, supply, affordability are always going to be the key drivers to this. And without attacking those, we're really just kind of kicking the can in my mind.
yep. Which kind of leads into the next news for those that
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
heard, but there are new eligibility requirements for HSA, FSA, HRA. Um, and there's a new company out that I thought was pretty fascinating. The company is called TrueMed. Not
Hmm.
sponsored, not sponsored in any way, shape, or form.
We're good
Um,
with the non-sponsorships. That's our thing.
um, but what's fascinating about them and why I wanted to bring it up here because it goes along with our ethos of using what's already out there, and if it's hard to get, let us figure it out for you.
Hmm.
FSAs, HSAs they're a little complicated. They're clunky to use. I think some are better
Hmm.
than others. But what this company did was they actually looked at it from the provider side. So there's only a set amount of things that you can spend things on. You
Yep.
you you could, in theory, spend it on gym memberships, certain types of diets and foods. The problem with that is that you basically needed a doctor's note, and then you have to submit it to the HSA FSA provider, and they're going to claim, deny it or accept it. This company actually did like the reverse, so they went to all these providers. So Daily Harvest was one of them,
Hmm.
and you could actually qualify for their stuff. And how it worked, I've kind of started to test it out. I'm just fascinated with it because
Yeah.
it's so unique because there's so much money. I think they claimed like There's like $150 billion that go into HSA, FSA accounts. And a lot of, not a lot of that, but there's a portion that just
Yeah.
sits there. And so if you could use it on other things, and I have an FSA and I put the full amount. I put like 3,000 a year, and it goes towards contact lenses. It goes towards glasses. It goes towards premium. No, it can't go towards premiums, but it can go
Not
towards
premium expenses.
really
Yeah.
unique things. You could get sunscreen. Like there's all these little things. You can get Dr. Scholl's. You can get like all of these things that are related. And I think that's fascinating. But for this one, they basically partnered with like all these gyms and all these like wellness companies. And so you would apply basically and tell them, any conditions you have, and they'll let you know like you can qualify. And then they'll actually do a doctor's note for you. And then
Right.
you
Like
submit
handle that
that
administrative burden. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so genius.
I mean, these
Maybe new
FSA
business idea. I don't know.
I mean, listen, FSAs, HSAs, they're great things. The administrative burden, I get like the regulations around them. It's hard. They're tough to use.
Yeah.
I have a decap, right, dependent care FSA claim that I've been going back and forth between my provider and the administrator for a month and a half. Finally got what I needed and submitted it. And I used the wrong date. Now we're going through the whole cycle again because I used the date it was printed, right? Or no,
Mm-hmm.
what it was run for, not the first billing day. Just it's absurd.
Little
We'll get
things, I
there.
know.
But it doesn't need to be that way, you know?
It doesn't. And I see this is just one step. So there's like the front end of it, and then there's these back end, and there's gonna be people that are gonna make links in between. But it's I mean, one of the biggest advantages for companies is money contributed there is tax free. So you're saving on the FICA tax. And on
Yep.
the employee, it's pre-tax. So both sides you're saving tax, which for me, putting $3,000 into an FSA, that's going to save me, I think, about $600 in taxes, because you're maybe 600 to $900 in taxes. But again, a lot of people don't know that exists. A lot of people can't wait until filing to see that money saved.
I mean,
And
that's
so,
the other thing when we start talking about like the populations, right? Is like, can you actually afford to go out of pocket for something and then get reimbursed, right? And like, how
yes,
does that model work? And there's ways where that model can work and work fine, and there's ways where it's a challenge. And the
yeah,
longer that distance is, right, between submitting a claim and getting money in your account, the harder it is, the lower the utilization is going to be with those things.
yep. And I remember actually talking with an FSA company, one of the largest,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd asked them a question like, is there any legal reason why companies just don't pre-fund like a dependent care or an FSA account like they do an HSA? And the answer is no. You as an employer could do it, and almost all FSA companies allow it. It's a click of a button. That just means you have to pre-fund it compared
Yep.
to having the employee pre-fund it and have to double dip. So you could actually make this a lot easier as an employer.
Yeah, can be done, not the norm. One of those things that, again, when you're looking for easy ways to move the needle on this, it's there.
That's an easy way. Very
Yeah.
easy way. And now for the main segment.
Do we have theme
Intro
music for that?
music. Do I have
You can
music?
you can put.
I wish. There is a thing you could do that. It's like a little board, and you could press it, and they can like clap in like intro music. But maybe we'll add some music right now.
We have to get some actual sponsors first for that.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's talk about this episode, which is episode 2, talking about solving childcare for manufacturers in rural areas. Take it away,
Hmm.
Doug.
Well, before we dive into the details and the stats with it, why is this so hard in rural areas, Greg?
Why is this so hard in rural areas? Think about it.
Yeah. Why?
Why is childcare so hard in rural areas?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, population's lower in these
Population's
areas.
lower. Yep.
Infrastructure is a lot lower in these
Yeah.
areas. Um, there's businesses out in those areas, specifically manufacturing, all types of manufacturing,
Yeah,
protein manufacturers.
manufacturing, agricultural, focus on manufacturing today, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, density is an issue, right? It's spread
yep,
out, right? You live in San Diego, I live in Kansas, right? It may take you an hour to travel the same distance. It takes me to travel 15 minutes, but I'm covering about 10 times the ground, right?
right.
Right. So population density is a factor. Population is absolutely a factor. I've worked being in the HCM space, now doing what we do today, working with organizations in these areas, like population's going down, right? I think
Yep.
the last assessment I did, in it was in like rural Nebraska, was like population's dropping, right? But in the state, it's going up, right? So this disparity is continuing to grow, but it's still the core of our manufacturing base and our agriculture. It's somewhat important to us as a country and an economy.
Yep.
And how do you get more population?
Well, one stat that I read, one fourth to one half of the population live in a rural area.
Mm-hmm.
And we just talked about rural areas. They are starting to and trying to, and actually always have been, trying to recruit families and more younger families.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big gaps that they've identified is the supply of childcare, especially in the rural areas. And because of that, it affects economic households, businesses, and also tax revenues.
Well, and when those drop, right, it affects the entire community. Right? I go back. I remember, it was 10 years ago, right? And customer I worked with when I was at Single Point in the HCM space. Shout out to Trent Doherty. And he, we, you know, the challenge, right? They were having trouble recruiting people. They're having to recruit people from like 20, 30 miles away, right, to come in to work at the facility because things had gotten to a point where there wasn't like the community, the safety in the area, it wasn't appealing to younger families, and they were relying on. Right, the thing I heard time and time again when I talk to these kind of customers is, right, like our workforce has been here for a long time. They're aging out, right? People are retiring. What do we do? How do we attract younger workers? And then, right, a lot of it was there's a lot of things going on around like same day pay. Like some of these things were starting to spring up to try to attract people and make it more attractive. You can raise wages, but ultimately, like that population now is getting older, right? Millennials and now Gen Z coming through. Like they're going to start having kids, right? And they want to have a family and they want to be somewhere. And that rural family kind of atmosphere, like some of these areas, it's a struggle at the moment, but it can turn around, right? And I think the investment that we're seeing now is core to that.
Mm-hmm. And investments, including the Indiana one last week. There's like
Yep.
three others we're going to touch on today. Um, I think I touched on this last time. Like there are a lot of dollars going to solve this. A lot of people
Yep.
just don't see it yet, and so just wait. It's coming. Um, I see it. I
well,
mean, we see it left and right, and that's
well,
exciting.
yeah. Let's get into some of the numbers, right, with the challenges, right? So in towns with residents, right, with 500 residents or fewer, right, less than 500 residents, only 51% of those residents have access to a childcare center, right?
Yeah.
34% have access to a family childcare home, right? So just the supply is not there, right? Okay, let's bump the population up just a bit, right? 2,500 residents or below, 2,500 to 500 residents, right? Only 70% have access to a childcare center, 40% to a family childcare home, right? Or family childcare
Yep.
center. That's not going to do it. At the end of the day, like supply has to be there.
Yeah. And shout out here to the Bipartisan Policy Center. They've done a tremendous job at sharing the research. I would
Mm-hmm.
definitely go to their site. It's not only just on childcare, they do everything around hunger, they do everything around homelessness. I mean, it is, I think, a very interesting take on it. but this is from research that they have done.
Hmm.
One other fascinating stat is that parents report, especially in rural areas, that they can pay less than $200 a week for full time
Hmm.
childcare. That's $800 a month. And my gut is that this is also like at the top of their budget. They may have been asked a question like, what's the max? Like $800 and you're making $36,000 a year in a rural area. Um,
Well, and
Significant.
that goes to one of the stats, right? That another one that the stats that they put out, right? 86% of rural parents, right, say that one of their partners stays home to watch the kids because of that cost gap, right?
Yep.
Supply, affordability, right? Right? Can we address those two? Right? When we get to availability, like all these things, but can we address those two things first? The other thing that I think is like makes it that much harder, right? When you look at the nature of the work in these areas, right, that focus on manufacturing, but agriculture as well, right? Is a lot of times we're needing care during non-traditional hours. So when
Yeah.
you look at your normal brick and mortar daycare center, they'd be open maybe for early care by 7 if you're lucky, and they're gonna close the doors at 6. And what do you do in those off times, right? What if it's transportation? Is this even close to where the support network is? Again, density. Things are spread out. People may be traveling from towns away, and there's a lot that needs to go in to be able to solve for it.
Yep. And one option that families um, may not have choices on, they just allow their kids to stay at home. And if they're on a farm, the kids are on a farm. And one of the stats that they showed was 97% of farm families are concerned that their children could get hurt on the farm. I know we have a couple team members we work with that actually grew up on farms, and they're like,
Yeah,
yes, it is not a place for
it's not.
kids.
It's us.
Um,
No,
it's not.
that one was crazy, but the stat on here that really like threw me was 33 children are seriously injured every day in agriculture related incidents. You like big country. I get like yes, that seems like a lot. It seems like too much. I feel like that should be too much.
I think so. So I mean, addressing the core root of safe, quality childcare, I think, can help with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
This, I think, another when we look at again, all of this leads up to like impact, and they did an analysis to show economic impact. So they
Hmm.
projected the rural projected economic loss is 33 to 50 billion dollars annually. Nationwide projected loss is 142 to 217 billion because of these gaps.
Yep.
That is huge, and it affects again a lot of rural manufacturers, a lot of rural families, a lot of rural communities. Um, and so I think summing it up, if we were to think of, there's a couple different solutions, but underlying all of this is that supply has to be addressed. No
Yeah.
question about it. And supply of not only all types of care, so whether that means new construction, renovation, maintenance, home daycares, nannies, babysitters, friends, family, all types of supply have to be addressed. And there's a lot, including that Indiana, that are looking to address this.
Yep.
But can employers wait for that? And then how do employers take advantage of that? If not directly or indirectly, they're going to be competing against the community at large as well. Um, Supply
I
has
think
to be
there's
addressed.
it needs to be addressed. I think when we look at it through an organizational lens, right? We can be reactive, right? You wait till you hear about it from us, right, or somewhere else, right, and go shoot. Or we can be proactive and start putting things in place, right, to begin addressing it, right. Doing something uh, is better than doing nothing in this case. There's things where you want to wait for the perfect solution. In this case, right, it actually pushes the can further down the road, right? It makes it harder to gain traction, makes it harder to retain employees, it makes it harder to build the community. And I think that's like when we look at this, yes, there are states that are putting more into it. You can access funds, it can help build supply, and again, Indiana was a great one to go through on the first podcast, but there are things that can be done today that don't have to be overwhelmingly expensive for an organization, but the return is massive
Yeah,
consistently.
yeah. And so, what's the solution, Doug? What is the holy
Supply.
grail here?
That's the crazy, right? We look at this, right? Like day in, day out, right? We look at this in different areas, right? And how do we solve it, right? With the piece we have available. It's never the same, right? It's never the same for a community, right? And you have to ask yourself as an organization, as a community, right? The questions of like, who are we trying to solve for, right? And why do we need to solve it? What's the impact of solving it, right? And who are
Yeah,
the stakeholders involved? And you have to keep that lens the entire time, right? Because, you know, when you have these conversations, you start talking about the investment into it, right? And, I know like one of the solutions we see organizations go through in rural areas is like, okay, we're just going to build a childcare facility. We're going to build one on site, right? And it's awesome. It's great, right? But then, right, supply. Then you have to think of affordability, right? So if you lose that lens of who you're building it for, right, this worker that's making like on average what $36,000 a year, right? Hey, here's a childcare space to keep it open, keep the doors open. It's going to be $1,200 a month.
yep,
Well, that may not work. We've seen it not work, right? And so ultimately, I think the solution's holistic, right? We have to look at all types of supply, right? But when you're looking at a specific area, right, it's what's there, but also what are people going to use? What can they afford to use? How long does it take to stand up? And how long do you want to wait before you're starting to see an impact from those things?
and liability. We see a lot
Yeah,
of
there's
companies that
there's liability too.
explore, from the employer perspective, they explore building an on-site, and whether they have like a third party running it,
Mm-hmm.
generally is some shared liability, and a lot of C levels can't stomach that liability from it. But I think you're right that if you really want to solve this, and I think our opinion and stance is that it's not just on the employer though. Um, it's a shared responsibility, right? So parents, providers, the employers, the businesses, the governments, getting them to all work together would be the holy grail. And there's a lot of organizations, we had this concept 3 years ago, and we've seen it
Yeah,
started to play out. Not only the stuff that we do in our day to day, but we see other governments. So Michigan doing the tri-share, that's been
yep.
successful, been renewed, more money funding into it. One of the things, we when we started to think about how to solve this and said parents, providers, employers, and government, one piece that the bipartisan policy talk that I was at included philanthropy as part of that. So we didn't really have that as part of our model, and I think that's an interesting angle because um,
It
it
can make a
can support.
difference. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I think I think those core four, right? Like, I mean, that's where it has to happen. Um, but that doesn't show up overnight, right? Like, it has to, like, somebody has to move first, right? And in
yeah,
some of these states, right, we see the governments, right? Indiana, Michigan, and others, right? They move first. They say, "Here's this program. We're going to make it broad, right? We're going to support this because we need it in our communities." Right? And we've seen it in others, where the organization goes, "This is like we need to do this, and we can do this, not just for our employees, but for our community, because there's a net benefit. There's a long-term net benefit to
yeah,
investing, right, in childcare for employees, for the community. As the community improves, right, more people want to be there. There's a larger labor pool to pull from, right? And at the end of the day, from an organizational standpoint, it comes down to labor. When we look at manufacturing, you're not manufacturing anything if you don't have somebody there to do it.
yep,
No matter how much automation we put in, somebody's got to be there still today. Maybe we'll get
yeah.
past that at some point, but we're not there at the moment.
No. I've even seen employers though that say, "I want to solve this, and if the government helped out a little bit, I would 100% do it." Um, that is a very good sign. But it just goes to show that if you want to create a sustainable model, it's going to be very, very hard for the employer to cover everything. And, I've seen a case study where a large manufacturer had a new plant, about 1,500 employees, um,
Hmm.
put in $5 million for an on site center. They've seen such great responses to it. However, they've also admitted, how are you going to scale that across every single plant that you have? I have
It's a
some
lot of it's a
ideas.
lot of childcare centers. Yeah, I know you have some
Yeah,
ideas.
I got some ideas. I mean, at the end of the day, leveraging the licensed home daycare network is a solid option.
It
A
is.
lot of people then say, well, quality, I don't want just somebody to be a babysitter. That's such an old school way of thinking, I think. There is, unfortunately, a stigma around home daycares. But when you look at licensed home daycares, you look at the ones that have providers that have MBAs. I mean, there is a home daycare. It's a gentleman in New York.
Hmm.
His daycare is called, I think, it's called Daddy's Home or Daddy's Place, and he has a Russian language program that he teaches kids in the predominant Russian area of New York, the Russian language program. I mean, that's like needs based at its finest. And that's what you can get with a lot of licensed home daycares. They're not just babysitters.
So two things from that I think are really interesting. One, I think some of the stigma comes, and I'll admit, like that was something that I was concerned about. We were looking for daycare for my youngest, right? And we were looking at, the centers were full, and we started looking at home daycares, and we were kind of like, I don't know, right? And as you get into it, right, and it was around the time we started talking, right, and it was like once you actually go, you meet these people. A lot of them are like educators, like they've worked in
Yeah.
facilities, right? Or they've been teachers, right? They're doing it because they love it and they want to provide for the community. There is curriculum, right? Um, and so I was really impressed. Like ultimately, like we ended up going with a center because of like location and where it was and the availability, like the hours of it. But we've looked multiple times. We've always included home daycares in our search since then,
Yeah.
right? As we look for the right place. And so, but a lot of people don't experience that, right?
Yep.
But the second thing I think from the one in New York that's interesting is it's in the community, right? It's in this area where there's a high density of people that speak Russian. And that's an incredible value to have in the community. Now, could you have a whole daycare center dedicated to that? I don't know, maybe, but it's not there. At
Yep.
least I don't think. But you can have that, and I think we've encountered situations, right, and where there's segments of populations, right. It could be really could be anything, right. Especially when you get into rural America, it could be refugee groups, right. It could be anything, and it's an opportunity to have that support within the community. It's an opportunity to have a small business, right, within that community that funds the community. And so we talk about restructuring some of these areas, growing the population, right, like building strong community health. It could be a huge asset.
Yep. When you talk about a home daycare too, let's talk about one that's already licensed. Um, it's already there. You don't need a brand
Yeah,
new building, so think about environmental impact. And
yeah,
then also, if you want to start a new home daycare, you're not looking at how long it takes to build an on-site center, generally about a year. And you're
hmm,
talking single digit millions. Home daycares, the startup cost is significantly cheaper. The time to start is significantly less. And then when you think of being able to expand or contract your supply, like your capacity, a
hmm,
center is pretty fixed. If you want to add more kids, well, you need more bathrooms, you need more public parking spaces. On a home
yeah,
daycare, you would just create a new home daycare or even expand it. You see some that are small licensed, they
yeah,
expand, they can go to large. Like
yeah.
use what's already there. Um, that is a big thing.
The,
When
the,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like the ability to use existing infrastructure to build childcare supply is a cheat code in these areas, right? Like there's houses, right? And the other thing is, we talk about like this, the quality, the safety of it. Like the licensing process is the same,
Yep.
They have to go through the same checks and balances that a daycare center does, with a home daycare. But I didn't know those things, right, until I got into the space.
Yeah.
And so learning about it, like it is, as you scale, and that could even be somebody that eventually opens a daycare center of their own, right? It can grow, right, with it. But yeah, time to value. How can we address this now or in a shorter term, right? It's a good option.
Um, so for employers that are thinking about this, we have some recommendations. Um, the first thing I think it's important for teams to think about is to what extent should we even enter this space? Um,
Hmm.
some want to build an on-site, and that is a lot more, and some others want networks to help, and some want to do subsidies, and some want to do like to what extent do they really want to help? And then that leads into, I think, as a company, does the company believe they have a responsibility, or do they have a role that they really do want to play? Like, those are some pretty foundational questions that
Yeah.
I think when I've seen companies take that approach, that's coming up with the solution makes more sense because you've already aligned on, yes, we want to be in this space, and yes, we believe that we have a responsibility, but
Hmm.
then we need help with the solution. But we've already agreed and we've already said we are going to do this. Now let's find a partner or let's do it ourselves.
Yep.
And that then leads into, you touched on this, but then we would recommend asking a couple questions to yourself. So, um, what's the root problem you're looking to solve? You had mentioned in manufacturing, in rural areas, it's labor.
Yep.
In other places, other organizations, it could be diversity. In other areas, it could be retention against the
Hmm.
labor, recruitment,
Yep.
absenteeism. We've seen industries where organizations place a strong emphasis on career progression.
Hmm.
There's a large tire company that I went to, and they have a big sign in their store that says 100% of our managers come from within.
Hmm.
And so, when you tie that with career progression, going from an hourly employee to a management, you're taking on more responsibility. And so, career progression, obviously, a barrier could be childcare. So, what is the root problem you're trying to solve?
Hmm.
Anything you wanted to add to that first question?
No, I think you're, you know, especially when we look at manufacturing in rural areas, like you're not just supporting somebody for a year, right? Typically, you're wanting people that are going to stay, grow that community. You're supporting them through their entire life cycle, right? And one of the challenges and where we've seen population reduce is, a lot of younger people left the rural areas, right? Like, how do you bring them
Yep.
back, right? There's an opportunity, I think, to build something interesting and revitalize a lot of these areas and really stabilize and grow the populations in some of these things that can be thriving now. And so
Yeah.
like that's at its core is you have to support the entire life cycle, right, for that family, not just right. Can we get them in the door? Because I think what's the
Yep.
average turnover, right? Manufacturing was around 40%. I think
Yeah.
that's a lot, right? That's a lot to replace. Like if you could move that, if you cut that number in half, it's still high, right? But it becomes more manageable, right? And this is a way you
Yeah.
can do it, right? We've seen it with programs.
Um, and that then leads into another question you should ask. What would you consider success? We've seen, and after talking with hundreds of companies, that their answer really is if you could beat the numbers today, I will consider a success. So if turnover is 45%, beat that amongst the cohort. And this is a solid approach. And that's like, I think that's table stakes. We've seen companies high single digit, mid double digit reduction.
I, I
That is,
I remember the
that's
first
great.
time, or first time we were able to calculate it like in detail. We went like, we think something's wrong. Like
Yeah.
this, like this is such a big difference. We had to go back and like audit each piece of it. It was real, and then we took it right. And we went, we repeated it, we repeated it, repeated it, And it's always, right, a factor of like 5x plus, like up to numbers sometimes we're like, okay, let's do that again. And they
Yeah.
hold. It's crazy.
Yeah. Next question. So after we identify the root of what we're trying to solve, and after we have some level of what we're going to think success looks like, who are we trying to keep front and center? The way I go about this, and I do whiteboarding sessions, but I'll pull up a whiteboard and I'll say, how do we segment our employees? What are the different cohorts of employees that are pretty similar? So manufacturing, you'll have frontline workers, hourly production workers.
Yep.
Then the next level is usually management or management, and then the level after that is usually corporate, or sometimes they call it above the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Each of those is different. Each of them have different income levels. Each of them have different needs. Each of them have different schedules. Each of them have different. They're all just a little bit different, but they all have. When you look at each one of them, they all have similar challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you are looking for a solution to solve everybody's care problem, I mean, we would recommend against that on day one. But generally, it's most of the people we spoke with, unless you're in the law or high tech, they're focused on the top 10%. I think a lot of people have been.
Yeah.
We come from a stance of, well, what about your bottom 90%? And so it's really important to keep front and center. Who are we trying to help? What is their income? What can they afford? And I'll give an example that I always give is, okay, if we're keeping front and center frontline workers $36,000 a year, we agree that we want our employees to use this benefit.
Mm-hmm.
We want to use the childcare that we offer to them. Well, what you wouldn't want to do is give them access to nannies and babysitters. It is just logically flawed. It is not going to happen. They do not have the funds to pay for a nanny and babysitter. So now, working backwards, you can start checking off the types of care that you're going to be able to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to work backwards and keep them front and center.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple way to go about this, right, is when we focus specifically on manufacturing, right, is the majority of your workers are on the line, right? Be really weird if it was just a bunch of people in the office and like one dude on the line making everything. And so, right, and they typically are going to be your lowest paid workers, right? That's your population. If you can solve for that population, everybody else will benefit, right?
Yep.
And so that is, right, like, what is that population and what do they make, right? Because you have to, like, it needs to be affordable, right? Like, it exists, great. Now can it be affordable?
Yep. Last question that you should ask yourself, and then we're going to go through the 5 things that you need to consider when trying to solve this, and then we're going to wrap it up. Is what we're going to implement for childcare, is it going to benefit just us as a company? Is it going to benefit the employee and us? Is it going to benefit us, them, and the community? There's different levels here you have to think about. And once you can answer all of those questions, then it's a matter of finding a solution for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's partnering with somebody, whether that's doing it yourself, there's definitely different ways. Now, shifting into the 5 areas that, and this is an order that you're going to have to solve. So keep in mind, let's keep front and center our hourly workers.
Yeah.
First thing that you have to solve is affordability. If you cannot implement a benefit that a $36,000 earning employee per year could afford, you're going to have low utilization. So affordability is key. We talked about some ideas here.
Mm-hmm.
Subsidies from employers, grants from the government. Those are really the 2 big ways. Philanthropy is another way for affordability. Yeah. We also talked about the FSA decap account. Like, that actually does reduce the cost of care. So in a decap account, you could save 30% on your taxes.
Yep.
What's the next one they should think about?
The next one's going to be proximity. On average, people don't want to drive more than 15 miles, right, out of their way, right, for childcare. Now, this is always like a really interesting one, especially when we go through like assessments, right? Is that could be proximity to the site, right? When we talk about like an on-site center, right? Like it tends to be like, oh, well, everybody's coming here, right? So we might as well put the supply here. And sometimes that's the right answer, right? And sometimes it's not. When it's not is right when your population is very distributed, right? Because what we found is people tend to prefer care near their home, right? Because that's where their support network is. So driving 30 miles one way, right? Let's say a manufacturing worker like has to, is working a second shift. They're not off till, 7, 8 in the evening, right? Is somebody else coming and picking them up if they live 30 miles away? So you have to look at your population and say proximity, but to where, right? Where is the
Yeah.
greatest impact? Near site, on site, I think is always some part of the solution. But we've also seen areas where there's pockets of employees where that would be a really big struggle for them. And a more distributed model, right, or a broader program may actually pay bigger dividends for the organization and the communities at large.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking also if you're traveling 30 minutes to an hour and you're working a first shift, you're having to take the kiddo in your car with you for an hour
Yep. So it's a
to
lot.
work, and then they're hanging out there and
Hmm.
then taking them home, right? What if you work second shift, third shift? That's a lot on them. And yeah, we've seen it time and time again. A lot of employees, a lot of people in general like to have care close to where they live. The next
Hmm.
is, all right, you have a $36,000 a year employee, so got to make it affordable. It's got to be close. It's got to be in distance to where they'd like.
Yep.
The next is, can it be open during the times that a manufacturing plant work that opens? Second shift, third shift.
Yep.
Um, Usually, on-site centers are not supporting your second, third shift. There are some that I've heard that are 24/7,
Hmm.
but a lot of home daycares actually can and do
Okay.
support 24/7 care. Another example of who are we trying to help, matching it with the types of care that exist out there. So availability, I can afford it. Is it close? Now, is it even open?
And this is where and I know we haven't, we went back. We said like nannies and sitters aren't an option, right? But when we look at like Friends, Family, Neighbor Network and some of the like company stipend programs, right? Childcare stipend programs we've looked at, right? Being broadened to expand, right? And some of that could actually be affordable in home care, right? Because
Yeah.
like there's a lot of ways to address it. And again, leveraging the community aspect to it too is an option for some of those things. And so,
Yeah.
like again, we keep that lens as we go through and say, okay, does this make sense, right? Does it cover, right, as much as we can, right? And are we using all of the available options?
Next, is it
Accessibility.
accessible? Do
Yep.
they even have open spaces? I mean, it's like it's this is hard, right? It's gotta and it's gotta be affordable. It's gotta be where they actually need it. It's gotta be open. It's gotta match the times. And so,
Hmm.
like, do they even have open spots? That's the next one. After that, the last is quality.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't fix quality first because if someone can't afford it, they're not going to use it. And so generally, that's been the stance. Is out of the five, quality is important, but it is the last one that you would solve for.
Yeah, you have to solve for it, right? It's not to minimize the impact of it, right? Like everybody wants the like, you know, there'd be like high levels of quality and like all these things. But if you can't hit the other ones, it doesn't matter that there's quality, right? Like you can't get there, you can't use it, you can't pay for it. There is not a space for you. It's not open during the hours. What does it matter what the quality is at that point? It still has to be solved, right? I think that's
Yep.
the key piece of this is like we can't minimize it and take it away and say quality doesn't matter, right? As a parent, neither of us parents we wouldn't right say that. But when you're building a solution, right, you need to make sure that you're willing to address the other four, or it's
Yeah.
not going to matter that you address quality.
Yep. And if you actually break these into two categories, affordability is around cost, proximity, availability, accessibility, and quality is about supply.
Yep.
Like those are the two things. And I think one other thing to think about, what role does technology play in this? I've talked to a few folks that have indicated that technology is not actually needed for this, but I would actually argue the reverse. Technology is a way to scale this. So if we agree that it's a shared responsibility, where parents and families, providers, government, philanthropy, businesses all need to work together. Well, what's going to tie them together? At a basic level, a telephone, email,
Carrier
you need
pigeon.
to be able to communicate, a carrier pigeon. You need to be able to connect. Now just layer on where we're at, with technology and marketplaces. If the fundamental understanding here is that everybody should pitch together, then a centralized technology solution, I think, actually can provide the scale that you need. Now, you have to match that with somebody that can also address the supply issue. So if you have a provider out there that has this ecosystem, but also has the ability to address what the gaps are, whether it's a proximity, availability, accessibility, the supply,
Right.
you have the holy grail. I mean, I don't see a way, even if you built an on-site, you still have technology that connects the families to the on-site registration system, payment system, right? So if you want to scale just that model, technology is involved.
But that's a huge piece of it, right? When we talk about, right, the total solution, getting all these parties involved, right? When you just talk about utilizing, right, leveraging the totality of childcare options that are available, right? You want to have line of sight to that. You want to be able to integrate those things together, because the way you manage, right, expand these programs efficiently, right, to maximize their impact is by looking at data, right, which is really hard to get in this space, right? We go through it all the time. It's why it's so exciting, the studies out there, and we can work with numbers that are already there. We're not going and hunting them down on our own. And it's when you can look at what are people actually using, what do they want to use, what can they afford to use, right? Again, you don't always know what people's needs are, right? You can survey, right? We do internal surveys, and you get answers. But do those answers always match the behavior? They do not.
No, they're one time when somebody, when you do a survey, you're asking somebody about childcare. They could be, on maternity leave and they don't have childcare for another 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to miss out on that if you do a one-time-a-year survey.
Yeah.
But I do believe that technology is a way to build a sustainable model. There are models that are not sustainable, but if you want to be able to scale it, you have to have a way that everybody's going to talk together. I mean, even if you're looking to scale like a nanny network, how are you going to background check everybody in person? You've got to be able to just do these basic technology things. With that said, Dougie Fresh.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to end with a couple tidbits for everybody. There are 3 other grant programs if you're interested in checking them out. There's Colorado Employer-Based Child Care Facility Grant. It's a grant program. It's to provide financial assistance to employers for the development or expansion of on-site child care facilities, up to $250,000 per facility. If you have more than 50 employees in California, look that one up.
Colorado.
Number
California.
2. What's that?
You said California. It's Colorado.
Did I say it?
You said
it's Colorado, yeah.
Colorado.
I'm in California.
I got your back. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Iowa Child Care Challenge Fund. This is an initiative. It's a grant program. Affordable, high-quality child care throughout Iowa. Public, private entities, including child care providers, schools, community, are eligible. Lastly, the Illinois Early Childhood Construction Grant, ECCG program. Grant program, financial assistance for the construction and renovation expansion of child care facilities in Illinois, up to $2 million. Child care centers, licensed homes. So remember, when you hear facility, that doesn't just mean a center. A home, licensed home, does count.
Yep.
In public schools. That'll be it for our episode 2. So why don't we cue the music?
We have an outro?
It's going right now. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.